Welcome back to Mornings with Dave King and Matt Martin. We got Dave King on the line, but we've also got Scott Braddock, the editor of the Quorum Report, on to talk a little bit about some Texas political news. Scott, how are you?
Morning, Matt. How are you?
I'm doing well. I feel like I drank about 3 cups of coffee, and all I had was some green tea, so I guess I'm doing pretty good.
Is it matcha?
Let's see. It's
that'll wake your brain right up, man.
No, it's ginkgo and black currant.
Oh, okay, all right.
Well, anyway.
Sounds like you're in Austin or something.
Yeah. Hey, if it tastes good, I'm okay with it. But
well, good morning, Scott. What's going on in your world?
Well, I'll tell you, there's so much happening. When you look around the state at what's going on with COVID-19 response, it still just overshadows everything, as you know. And we've been watching the governor's moves this week. Just yesterday, the state said that they were going to allow, once again, and I know a lot of people are looking forward to this, once again, people can visit their elderly relatives at some nursing home facilities, but there are some restrictions. And then you have the governor continuing to try to explain, what's going on with schools. So where would you like to start?
Well, I'll tell you, I want to start with the, checking on the elderly, because I had my in-laws were in town from Tennessee, and they've been taking care of their elderly mother. It's our kid's great grandmother, and she's in her 90s, and she needs constant care. She's in a healthcare facility, a nursing home, and they've been able to go and check on her every day. What they had to do is they had to go get tested for COVID-19, and after they got tested, they were able and were proven to be negative. They were able to go in and take care of their relative and see their relative and be there for her, make sure she eats and all of that stuff. But that's something that in Texas we haven't been able to do. So what exactly are the new rules and regulations to make sure that we can take care of our elderly?
Well, the Texas Health and Human Services Commission laid out a number of rules. I'll give you the highlights. This is for nursing homes. The staff has to be getting those tests. The people who are visiting have to be tested, because you can't be going to one of these facilities if you have tested positive for COVID-19. And all physical contact still is prohibited between visitors and residents. And these rules also require that all visits at nursing homes have to happen outdoors, Matt. Visits at other long-term care facilities like the assisted living facilities, those can be indoors, but they have to have plexiglass between the visitor and the person who's living there. So still quite a few restrictions in place, but I do know, and I was talking just with some folks, it's just anecdotal, but it's really heartbreaking when these people who would depend on at least the weekly visit from some relatives, to come by and have some interaction, get to visit with them, talk with them in person. So important for those folks. And while, of course, we want to make sure that they're safe from COVID-19, because we're talking about, of course, the most vulnerable population, that this disease could really have a terrible effect on. But they also have other issues as well, right? I mean, isolation is, quite frankly, and medically depressing.
Yeah, it's just not good for their health.
For people. It's terrible for people to be isolated that way. And so state is trying to strike a balance on this, and we'll see how it works.
I don't see if there can be no contact whatsoever. I do not see how this is going to help whatsoever. I mean, because I know that there has been some visitation as long as there was, a window or something between. Hasn't there been some visitation anyway?
Yeah, there have been some people doing that. Going to one of my friends, for example, was visiting their mother here in Austin in a facility, and had basically just had to stay completely outside the facility. And they could, sort of wave at them outside the window, which, again, is just a weird reality, as far as how all this is being handled. So I do know a lot of people are looking forward to this. Now, I did see that there were some people who still said, and I get it, there are some objections. People will say, well, any sort of exposure to folks who are living in the outside world may put these folks' health at risk. And again, I think it's about trying to strike the balance between, keeping people safe from COVID-19, but then also providing something else that they need for their mental health as well, which is being able to see their loved ones.
So you may or may not know this, but, like I said, states like Tennessee have allowed those that have tested negative to COVID-19 to go and actually help their relatives and be in the room with them. there's not those touch restrictions or anything there. Has the state of Texas done any type of research on these other states that are allowing that to happen, and if they're having any troubles with that?
I'm not sure if they looked exactly at what the other states were doing. I do know that Governor Abbott has said that when it comes to all of these orders that are coming from his administration, we'll say it comes from Health and Human Services, but that's the agency within the administration. All this really comes from the top, of course. And he says, over and over again, at every juncture, no matter what the big decision is, that it's all based on data and doctors and what advice he's getting from medical professionals, and looking at the numbers of COVID-19 cases, and also looking at what parts of the state are facing higher numbers, like in the Valley down South Texas. Terrible right now, huge outbreak, whereas earlier in the year you had big outbreak up in Amarillo area. That seems to have leveled off some.
So looking at that, have we seen any from all of his orders, closing down the bars, mask orders, everything else he's done, have we seen any positive movement around Texas?
Well, the latest numbers were maybe not that encouraging. As of yesterday, Texas reporting around 8,000 people have died from COVID-19 or died with COVID-19. That's up from 306 from the day before. Over a 2-week period, we were up about 3,200 deaths. So this is exponential, right? And when you hear the national numbers of 1,000 deaths per day, quite a few of those, a big percentage coming from Texas, 234 reported deaths per day right now is the average. So that's more deaths from COVID-19 than we had in all of March, April, May, and June combined. So, things might start to level off and then come back down. But if you look at the totality of the situation, if you go all the way back to the beginning of the pandemic and fast forward to now, we're not still in a great place, Matt.
So has the governor, has he been willing to do more interviews lately than he was doing before? Has anybody questioned him on anything yet?
He was doing some television interviews in various places around the state. I saw him interviewed on KXAN television here in Austin, and he did have a press conference where he was pretty open about answering questions in San Antonio that I was not there, but one of my colleagues was, and was able to ask him some questions about all of this. He's been trying to focus, Abbott has been trying to focus on getting schools opened once again, which is just coming up in weeks. We're getting to crunch time, right, for back to school, and I think parents out there, as you know all too well, Matt, people need to be able to make plans about, what's going on in their lives, be able to make sure that the kids are taken care of, that they're going to be educated, and that people can go back to work. It's a big concern, but then you do have others who say, look, you have those teachers who are, especially our most experienced teachers, 62, 65 plus, who are in the vulnerable population, and maybe a lot of those don't want to be mixed in with this population of kids who may not, they may not be as susceptible to what COVID-19 might do to them, but they could be spreaders for the people who are older.
Yeah. All right. Well, Scott, can you hold on to another segment? We've got to take a quick break.
Happy to.
All right. Well, let's take a quick break here on Newstalk 95.1 FM, 790 AM. KFYO. We'll be right back with the editor of the Quorum Report, Scott Braddock. Welcome back to Mornings with Dave King and Matt Martin. We're going to go back to the phones. We've got Scott Braddock, editor of the Quorum Report, on the line. And Scott, one of the things that you had sent was that that the Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick says a spike in gun sales signals Trump's victory is coming. Now, I have a hard time believing that Trump's going to lose Texas, but I don't know how that does over the whole United States.
Yeah, I don't either, and it seems like, and I mean this respectfully, but that the Lieutenant Governor, and he's being a dutiful member of the Trump campaign because he is the chairman for the Trump campaign here in Texas, maybe sort of grasping for straws because you've had one poll after another showing bad numbers for President Trump, particularly in some swing states, and in particular Florida, which of course is his adopted home state, where he's not doing well right now. Of course, the numbers could change, and there's a long way to go, and we don't know what's going to happen with the coronavirus, whether there's going to be some turnaround in the situation, whether we're going to see a vaccine maybe sooner than we had thought, or maybe some treatment that's really effective sooner than thought. Nobody knows what's going to happen before November here, of course, so you say all that first, but polls have not been good for the president, and they also haven't been good, as you sort of alluded to, Here in Texas, although I'm with you, I would say that it's probably a long shot that the Democrat could pull off a victory in Texas. But what the lieutenant governor said was that, look, he says, you have record numbers of people buying guns all across the United States. And, of course, what he was pointing to is national numbers of millions of guns being sold. And he said, quote, people who buy guns don't vote for Democrats who are going to take them away.
That's not true, by the way.
Well, yeah, I know a lot of folks who buy guns who are voting for Democrats.
I do too. And then you look at the protests from
Yeah.
the Black Lives Matter protests and Antifa. You've got a lot of gun carriers who are legally carrying their guns that are obviously Democrats.
It's fascinating that you have sort of these different overlapping constituencies, right? Gun enthusiasts who also happen to be Democrats, and people who are sympathetic to the Black Lives Matter movement, right? A lot of African American folks are gun owners, but I do think that this points to a little bit of, I hate to say it this way, but a little bit of desperation among those who want to sort of prop up the president where he's at right now electorally. And again, there's a long way to go, but things aren't looking great, and so when they're not, you try to find anything you can.
So a little, I guess, on the same kind of topic, kind of off of Texas, but this lawsuit or this trying to shut down the NRA in New York, if anything's going to have an effect on gun owners that might change their mind about Democrats, it might be something like that.
Well, it could be, and all of the particulars of that case very interesting as you look into what the prosecutors, the Attorney General in New York, what they're trying to do, what they're trying to say about the organization itself, and not necessarily about the specific issue that the organization champions. But that is a thing where it's just sort of a Republican consultant's dream. For any of these folks who are running for office as Republicans, they can say, well, look, you have the Democratic folks in New York who are trying to get rid of the NRA, and it's one more thing where you're going to see, I'm sure if you haven't seen them already, you'll see fundraising emails, not just from the NRA, but other Republicans who are saying, look what the Democrats are trying to do. They're trying to take away your Second Amendment rights. I would say one other thing about this gun issue is pretty interesting. If you look historically, it has been the case that when gun sales are going through the roof, it usually means that the Democrat is about to win, because there are a lot of people who think, and then it never really comes to fruition, but they think that if there's a Democrat in the White House, there's going to be some move to take people's guns away, and so people will stock up.
Yeah, but also at the same time, there's a little bit more unrest. I think that people are a little bit more worried about the unrest around the United States as well.
There is, and there is for sure, and there's also the fact that some of the unrest, I think there was a lot more of it earlier in the year, right, especially right after the death of George Floyd, a Houston native who, of course, we all saw killed at the hands of police, very wrongly, and was condemned by Republicans and Democrats alike, right, after it happened. In Minnesota, I think there was a lot more of that, and what we're seeing now is some exaggeration of what is still going on, because after the wheels of justice started to sort of turn against the police officers who had committed that act or been complicit in it up in Minnesota, most of the protests, the vast majority of them, just sort of died down all across the country.
So another topic that you'd put up is that Biden campaign is adding key staff in Texas. Now, I have to ask this: do you think that means that Biden is seeing a chance to win Texas?
Well, they're going to put forth an effort, and sometimes when you see the Democratic candidate for president make any moves in Texas, a lot of times it's mainly designed to try to grab some headlines and get people to ask the question that we're now talking about, right? So, mission accomplished, Biden team. But they did hire some capable folks, some veterans of Texas politics who do know their way around, which I wouldn't say that just about anybody, because a lot of times, Matt, I see a lot of Democratic campaigns will bring people into Texas from elsewhere who don't know anything about the state and its politics, and in this case, I think they have some folks who do know what they're talking about. Of course, a presidential campaign is a behemoth. It's a monstrosity. If you're trying to get input as a presidential candidate from all of your teams all across the country in all of the states, that are either in play or could be in play. There becomes a question of whether or not those folks actually are listened to, and then whether they actually get any resources. It's important to point out we still haven't seen any real evidence, despite the polls and despite a tiny television ad by, I think, a couple weeks ago by the Biden campaign in Texas. We haven't seen any evidence that they're really going to spend millions and millions of dollars to put real resources into Texas to try to win this place. That's not happening yet.
All right, right quick, we got about 30 seconds left. What do you have on the quorumreport.com?
Well, we're keeping track of what's going on with UIL Sports. UIL was meeting this morning, and so we'll have an important update on what's going on. They were meeting today, getting the report from one of my reporters. We'll have that up for you a little bit later for what's going to happen with those high school sports all across Texas. It's at quorumreport.com.
All right, thank you, Scott. Thanks for coming on. Scott Braddock, editor of the Quorum Report. And then, of course, we'll be back on Monday on Newstalk 95.1 FM, 790 AM, KFYO.